So some key examples that we have of photoautotrophs are going to be things like, again, plants, algae. There's also some purple and green sulfur bacteria. And these organisms combine the use of light as a carbon source as well as carbon dioxide as an energy source. So there's a variety of organisms out there that employ this type of energy carbon combination. Now, chemoautotrophs that do this are going to use chemicals like carbon as well as carbon dioxide in conjunction with one another to serve as the energy source. And some key examples of chemoautotrophs are going to be things like sulfur bacteria. Sulfur bacteria can use chemicals as an energy source, and then they also rely on the carbon dioxide as a carbon source, which is why this classifies them among what we refer to as a chemoautotroph. Now, we also have another term known as chemoheterotroph, which I talked about on the last slide. These are organisms that will rely on the use of chemicals, such again as a carbon source, as well as organic compounds, and they use organic compounds other than carbon dioxide as an energy source. And most animals all kind of belong to this group known as the chemoheterotrophs. So we belong to this group. Humans, we have to acquire energy from the digestion of other chemicals as well as organic compounds. And then we traditionally don't really rely on CO2 all that much. In fact, it's more of a waste product for us. But in terms of where we fit in the niche and how we are categorized based on our energy and carbon uses, we are classified as chemoheterotrophs. Now, some other terms to kind of understand is the terms of how the classifying organisms based on their energy and carbon sources kind of sets the stage for the type of ecological niche an organism will fill. So we kind of want to understand on a global kind of context the ecology that kind of is a byproduct of having so many different types of microorganisms classified in different manners based on their energy and carbon use energy and carbon sources as they are used. So ecology, to understand the term, is really just the study of all the interactions that exist between organisms and the world around them. So an example of ecology is essentially, take for example a mushroom. When you think of a mushroom, you're kind of a little interested in figuring out how the heck does this mushroom generate energy for itself. Well, to understand that, you kind of want to evaluate the ecology in which that organism resides. So a mushroom, basically, you'd find growing on decaying organic material, right? Which means if it's growing on decaying organic material, it's extracting organic nutrients from that material in order for the fungal cells to survive. So with something like a fungus, when we study that, we would, if we are observing the fungus using chemicals from a specific energy source, so they could be something like wood, and it's also relying on compounds that are used as a carbon source that are derived from anything other than carbon dioxide, then that would classify a fungal organism in the chemoheterotroph group. So that's just one example of why we're talking about why we want to include ecology in kind of this discussion of how microorganisms use and generate use carbon sources and generate energy from them, because not all of them do that, and there's a wide variety of them, and a lot of that has to do or is based on the fact that the interactions between living organisms and the world around them has such a very diverse span. because there's so many ways in which organisms interact with their surroundings. And when we study all of that, all of the ecology that's out there in multiple systems, then we start looking at ecosystems. And an ecosystem is going to refer to the interactions that exist between living organisms and their non-living environment. And so when we talk about ecosystem, we're talking about any interactions in which organisms have some sort of interaction with anything that's non-living in the environment. Okay, so this could be things like rocks, which are non-living. The ecosystems are pretty important because this enables us to understand the parameters by which organisms need in order to thrive in. And so some inorganic or non-living environmental factors are going to be things like water. Water is a non-living environmental factor, but still necessary for organisms to survive. Another example would be that of things like air. There's microscopic elements to air, but for the most part, there's just particulates that's in air. So understanding how an organism interacts with air would be an example of studying would be an example of studying an ecosystem. Okay, there's a lot of interrelationships that tend to exist among different nutritional types. And this is also very critical to enhance to basically generate a fully functional ecosystem. Some examples are that of phototrophs like algae and plants. They produce food and they produce oxygen, and that oxygen and food is used by other organisms like us and like more complex animals in order for us to survive. So there's this kind of particular niche that organism that has a different nutritional type plays in terms of establishing a nice balance to keeping multiple organisms reflecting a variety of nutritional types in balance with one another. So when you think of it, kind of think of having organism have a specific niche inside of an ecosystem. You wouldn't want to have all organisms, say, eat starch, because all of the starch in the world, if it was just eaten by all of the organisms in the world, then there would be no, then all the starch would just be consumed. But if you have a variety of nutritional type based organisms that may not want to eat starch, but they'll consume more so carbohydrates or proteins, or you have an organism that likes to ingest inorganic materials from rocks, something like a lichen that grows best on rocks, then you start to have more diversity, which means you have kind of a more imbalanced system among the organisms that reside inside of that ecosystem. And this is where you start getting these interrelationships where one organism fills a specific niche and it's either byproducts of its behavior can be used by other organisms in order for them to survive. So again, when you think about photoautotrophs, they like to generate energy using light from the sun, and then they could use that energy to generate sugars from for themselves. Well, when they do that, they start to release a whole lot of oxygen into the environment, which is beneficial to us and animals because we breathe in that oxygen. And when we breathe in the oxygen and our cells undergo the process of metabolism, we return the favor to the photoautotrophs by releasing carbon dioxide, which enables the photoautotrophs to survive in their photosynthetic cycle. So it's an interesting interrelationship that we have, and in a sense kind of this dependency kind of theory that should be understood. Okay, and this scheme right here on this figure is just kind of outlining the those interrelationships. Kind of the key example I was telling you about, extracting the plants extracting energy from essentially the process of photosynthesis, where light is uptaken by the leaves of a plant, and then that light is converted into energy that is used to produce food for the plant. And then you have an herbivore that comes and eats the plants, and those herbivores can be food for carnivores. And so you basically have these photosynthetic food chain based on this particular diagram, at least this one here on this side of the picture. For the chemosynthetic food chain, you have bacteria that use sulfide to produce energy. When this happens, you have the reduction of some carbon compounds. You have a lot of these organisms that reside in hydrothermal vents, and then as they are feeding off the sulfide, they can basically start serving as food for more complex carnivores. So they start to fill this niche where they will feed off of sulfide, and then do so they'll get bigger, and then they'll basically be used as prey for more complex carnivores. Okay. So let's talk about metabolism. And here's where we'll get back to looking at the processes of catabolism and anabolism. Metabolism is, again, all of the chemical reactions that are going to take place inside of a cell. And all of those reactions are referred to as metabolic reactions. And metabolic reactions are only made possible by the existence of enzymes. So if you don't have any enzymes, then your metabolic reactions are going to not take place. Or if they are taking place, they're going to take place at an extremely, extremely slow rate. So when we talk about enzymes, again, I feel like I keep saying this over and over, these really are simple proteins that are used as catalysts to expedite a reaction. Your book refers to them as biological catalysts. That just means that they have a role in these biological metabolic reactions that we'll be discussing. And they enable chemical reactions to take place by accelerating them. Okay, the way that enzyme works is that it will only operate on a specific substrate. So here we have a substrate, here we have the enzyme. So your enzyme is outlined in blue, the substrate is outlined in green. And your substrate plus your enzyme have to fit together like a lock and key in order for that chemical reaction to occur, or to take place, or to be expedited. Okay, remember, these enzymes are simply the catalyst. So the enzyme pairs up with the substrate, and once it pairs up, the enzyme will start to break apart that substrate to produce small end products. So this figure here is turned the substrate to demonstrates that the substrate has two components to it. It has a pink component and a purple component. And at the end of the reaction, you have two end components that have been separated or broken down, where you have a pink component and a purple component. So this is what we mean when we're talking about enzymes, is simply using enzymes to expedite a reaction, so that way you can break apart molecules. Some things to know about enzymes: they're incredibly specific. Only specific substrates will attract specific enzymes. So if you have multiple substrates in a cell, and you only have one type of enzyme in that cell, if that enzyme is not specific to the substrate, it will not operate on all of the substrates present. So as long as the enzyme and substrate fit together, you're going to be able to expedite the reaction. So again, the key thing to understand about enzymes is that they are incredibly specific. They only operate on a specific substrate, and they have a specific shape that allows them to fit into a substrate, or a substrate to fit into them, just like a lock and key would. During reactions, enzymes don't become altered, but the reactions will eventually stop because there's a regulatory mechanism that causes that.